So cognitive capacity development is when you allow students to do all the thinking. That's when you are putting a lot of the work onto students. And another way to think about it that researchers classify the term is productive struggle. How are students productively struggling and creating academic mindsets that allow them to grapple and to move out of what we also call the learning pit. When you go through this pit, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can naturally, I don't think I can do this. I don't know if I have all the right skills, the right things I need to do. This is really hard. This is challenging. And then you kind of hit that pit at the bottom and you're like, okay, I don't know exactly what to do. But if you have the right scaffolds through, as a teacher is helping a student go through, that student can then move out of that pit and say, okay, I can do this. I see it. I got it. I understand it. And then you get that eureka moment at the end, like, okay. You have to allow students to learn how to think and have the skills and habits and mind to think on their own for them to move from being dependent learners, where they're very passive in their learners, to moving students to seeing like, I can do this, I have great ideas, and I can make sense of these ideas and make those connections myself. And my teacher, although I love that teacher, they're not my tree of knowledge, they're my facilitator of that process. Let's say, for example, because I'm a mathematics teacher, that's my background, I come up and I teach you the area formula, but I don't develop any conceptual understanding. I just tell you, hey, to find the area of a rectangle, I do length times width. And we do practice problems. I'm doing practice problems, you follow me, now you go do it yourself, and then let's see how well you did. And that process, it doesn't allow students to make connections to different concepts of mathematics. It doesn't allow them to understand why we take the length times the width to find the area. And so what happens is that students end up having these particular learning gaps, and learning starts to break down because they have built up the strength of a procedural understanding. But if they get presented with something where they have to apply it, or they have to connect it to a different concept, they don't have that necessary skill because a teacher hasn't developed it, because they have been so procedural in their work. So when you give students a chance in a class, for example, once again, the math classroom, to give them a problem, a very high quality, what we call high quality math task, where they get to grapple, they start to not only get to practice all these things such as language development, literacy practices, but they start to understand mathematically, what is the question asking me? What can I pull from my own prior knowledge that I'm making sense of? And how can I use the individuals, my classmates, and their strengths to help me make sense to kind of go through that learning pit of like getting to a solution or just presenting ideas and conjectures. And so through that process, students are starting to see different connections to different concepts when they're working through those types of problems. And they get to see all these different strategies, which allows them to have what we call cognitive flexibility too. So they're starting to develop executive functioning skills when we go through these particular processes. So cognitive flexibility, metacognition, all of these wonderful aspects when you allow kids to really just grapple and get to learn from each other.